When nations stare into the abyss, when their survival hangs by a thread, they all reach for the same forbidden weapon. It doesn't matter whether they were ancient kingdoms or modern superpowers, whether ruled by emperors, presidents, or tyrants. History shows that when crisis tightens, its grip when debts suffocate the treasury. When wars devour resources, leaders turn to the same fatal illusion. They start printing money. And every single time, the consequences are catastrophic. Tonight, we're rediving into 3 moments in human history when entire civilizations tried to defy economic reality by creating wealth from nothing. These stories are not dusty relics of the past. They are warnings that are becoming louder, clearer, and far more urgent, because the pattern never changes. First comes crisis, political chaos, collapsing economies, raging wars. The treasury is empty, raising taxes risks revolt. Borrowing reaches its limits. Then comes the genius idea: create more currency out of thin air. Problem solved. Or so they think. But what follows is always the same nightmare. Prices explode, savings evaporate, society fractures, and empires that once commanded the world crumble into the dust. The very money they thought would save them becomes the poison that destroys them. Here's the terrifying part. Every leader who travels this road believes they're the exception. They think their crisis is unique, their economists are smarter, their system is unbreakable, until it breaks. Tonight we'll explore 3 civilizations that learned this lesson through devastation. Ancient Rome, where emperors diluted silver coins to pay for endless wars. Weimar Germany, where the government printed marks by the billions to pay impossible debts. Modern Zimbabwe, where reckless printing turned a thriving economy into a wasteland. Different eras, different cultures, but the same tragic arc. Each empire believed it had discovered limitless wealth. Each was proven catastrophically wrong when reality came crashing down. And this isn't just a history lesson. The same forces are moving today. And the next collapse won't be limited to one nation. It will ripple across the entire planet. So let's begin with the original monetary meltdown, the disaster that helped bring Rome to its knees. People think Rome fell because of barbarian invasions or political corruption. Those were symptoms. The real killer was hidden in plain sight, stamped onto every coin that passed through Roman hands. For centuries, Rome's economy ran on the denarius, a nearly pure silver coin trusted across 3 continents. Soldiers were paid with it, merchants saved with it, citizens stored their wealth in it. The denarius was real money, solid, reliable, respected everywhere. But running an empire is expensive, very expensive. Rome needed to pay its legions, repair its massive infrastructure, and fight wars on multiple frontiers. Tax revenues couldn't keep up. Citizens were already burdened, and raising taxes further risked rebellion. Borrowing had limits. Rome had no central bank, no treasury bonds, no modern tools. So emperors discovered a trick they thought was brilliant. Instead of admitting they were broke, they began quietly reducing the silver in each denarius. Not enough to be obvious at first, just enough to stretch the empire's silver supply. With the same amount of silver, they could mint more coins. More coins meant more spending power. Problem solved. For the government, but disaster had already begun. Under Augustus, the denarius was 95% pure silver. By the early 3rd century, under Caracalla, it had dropped to 50%, and by the time of Gallienus, less than 5% silver. What once was solid silver had become bronze, sprayed with a thin silver coating. Citizens caught on quickly. The coins felt lighter. They looked different. Merchants began weighing them, scratching them, rejecting them. And as confidence collapsed, inflation exploded. Wheat that once cost 1 denarius suddenly cost 2, then 5, then 10. Not because wheat was scarce, but because the money had become hollow. Families watched their savings turn to dust. Soldiers found their pay worthless. Trade collapsed. People abandoned Roman currency and demanded gold, goods, or foreign coins. The government's response? Print even more debased coins. The cycle accelerated. Less valuable money required more money. More money made the money even less valuable. Faith in the system disintegrated. Barter returned. Farmers traded grain for tools. Craftsmen swapped pottery for clothes. The empire's once sophisticated economy splintered into local trade networks. Rome wasn't just losing money, it was losing civilization, one diluted coin at a time, and the true collapse hadn't even begun. Rome's money didn't just lose value, its collapse tore the empire apart from the inside. Soldiers went unpaid and mutinied, or even worse, defected to enemy generals. Tax collectors gathered revenues that were worthless before they could deliver them. Provincial governors found themselves ruling territories that produced nothing of value for Rome's treasury. All of this came to a head during one of the darkest chapters in Western history, the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome endured nearly 50 years of non-stop chaos. Over 50 emperors rose and fell, most murdered within months. Plagues ravaged the provinces. Barbarian tribes hammered the borders. Civil wars spread like wildfire as ambitious generals battled for control. But beneath the assassinations, invasions, and uprisings was one brutal truth. The money was broken, and when your money collapses, everything else collapses with it. You can run an empire on worthless coins any more than you can build a palace on sinking sand. Rome's economic foundation had rotted away, and the entire superstructure was cracking. In desperation, Emperor Diocletian tried to halt the destruction. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, a sweeping command that fixed the price of over 1,000 goods and services. Violators faced the death penalty. But you can't force value into worthless money by decree. You can't legislate trust. You can't order inflation to stop. The black market exploded. Official trade vanished. People learned the truth. No law, no emperor, no threat could make broken money whole again. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius and introduced the gold solidus under Constantine. But by then, the damage ran too deep. The Western Empire had become a hollow shell, surviving only on momentum and ancient prestige. And so came history's first great warning about money printing. It always begins with an emergency. It always feels temporary. It always seems manageable. And it always ends in ruin. But humanity didn't listen. 16 centuries later, in the rubble of World War I, Germany repeated Rome's mistake, this time with terrifying mathematical precision. The Treaty of Versailles didn't just end the war, it sentenced Germany to financial execution. The Allies demanded reparations so enormous they seemed like a cosmic joke. 132 billion gold marks, the equivalent of roughly $400 billion today. More than Germany's entire economy, a bill designed not to be paid, but to break a nation. Germany faced 4 impossible choices: refuse payment and face invasion, raise taxes and spark revolution, borrow money it could never repay, or do what desperate governments always do, print their way out. At first it seemed harmless. A few billion marks here, a few billion there, just enough, they said, to get through the crisis. But once you start printing money to pay debts, you can never print enough. Every new mark made the old marks worth less, and every lost bit of value demanded even more printing. By 1922, the presses ran day and night. Factories were hired just to produce currency. The Reichsbank printed marks so fast, the ink barely had time to dry. The numbers turned surreal. In January 1922, $1 bought 300 marks. By summer, 800. By Christmas, 7,000. Germany wasn't sinking, it was free-falling. Workers demanded wages twice a day because their morning pay was worthless by evening. Restaurants changed prices every hour. Shops used chalkboards instead of printed tags. Why bother printing a price when it would change before the ink dried? And then came 1923, the year hyperinflation achieved nightmare status. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark in 1919 cost 12 marks in 1921, 3,000 marks by mid-1923, 2 million marks by September, 200 billion marks by November. Families carried cash in wheelbarrows. Children played with stacks of banknotes because they were cheaper than toys. People wallpapered their homes with money because wallpaper cost more than currency. The German mark had become a sick joke. Entire life savings evaporated overnight. Pensioners who had worked decades were reduced to begging. The middle class, the heart of German society, was annihilated. Bank accounts, insurance policies, government bonds, all turned to ash. But those who understood the chaos grew rich. The wealthy converted their marks into gold, foreign currency, or property. Industrialists paid off massive debts using worthless paper. Foreign investors bought German factories for pocket change. It was the greatest transfer of wealth in German history, from savers to debtors, from workers to the elite, from ordinary citizens to international speculators. Hyperinflation in Germany ended almost as quickly as it had erupted, but the scars it left behind were permanent. A whole generation learned the harsh truth that governments can lie about money, that savings can vanish overnight, that democracy offers no shield against financial destruction. This trauma didn't fade. It shaped German politics for decades, influenced their response to the crises of the 1930s, and forged their strict post-World War II monetary policy. When you've watched your entire life savings turn into worthless paper, the memory becomes part of your national DNA, a wound that never fully heals. But somehow, the world ignored Germany's agony. The same mistake would be repeated again and again, different countries, different eras, different excuses. Because when nations face the fire, when governments stare down impossible choices, the temptation to print money becomes irresistible. Act 3 of our global monetary tragedy doesn't take place in ancient Rome or war-torn Europe, but in modern African Zimbabwe. At the dawn of the 21st century, in the year 2000, Zimbabwe was a functioning country. Its currency was stable. Its farms were thriving. Its economy was growing. 20 years later, it had become a symbol of hyperinflation, so extreme that children played with trillion-dollar notes like they were toys. This wasn't ancient history. This wasn't wartime chaos. This was the modern world, supposedly guided by economic wisdom and monetary science. And yet Zimbabwe still managed to obliterate its currency so completely that the government eventually abandoned it and started using foreign money just to keep the lights on. The collapse began with radical land reforms that shattered agricultural production. Zimbabwe, once the breadbasket of southern Africa, saw its farms collapse almost overnight. exports disappeared, revenues dried up, and suddenly, the government was staring at budget holes big enough to swallow the entire economy. Sound familiar? Crisis, an empty treasury, a desperate government, the same stage, the same conditions, the same trap that destroyed Rome and crushed Germany. And once again, leaders told themselves they were different, that their situation was special, that printing money could patch the holes instead of tearing them wider. President Robert Mugabe's government began printing Zimbabwean dollars to cover deficits. At first it seemed manageable, a few billion here, a few billion there, just enough to keep civil servants paid and maintain the illusion of a functioning state. But printing money to survive a crisis is like drinking seawater to cure thirst. It offers relief right before it kills you. Every new batch of money diluted the value of every old one. Prices rose. The government printed more, prices rose again. The presses sped up. By 2003, inflation hit triple digits. By 2006, it soared past 1,000%. By 2008, Zimbabwe entered hyperinflation so extreme economists could barely calculate it. The official inflation rate hit 89 sextillion%, a number with 21 zeros. Different names, different leaders, different continents, but the same story. Rome thought it could stretch silver forever. Germany believed it could print its way out of the Versailles trap. Zimbabwe convinced itself it was building a new economy. Every time, the final chapter is identical. The money dies, the people suffer, and the nation collapses. What makes this moment in history terrifying is scale. Rome's disaster was regional, Germany's was national, Zimbabwe's was local. But today, every major economy runs on paper, money backed by nothing but political promises. Central banks coordinate printing across continents, debts are measured in trillions, and crises trigger trillions more. When the next monetary collapse arrives, it won't be contained. It won't be limited by borders, it will be global. The warning signs are already flashing. Governments printing trillions during every emergency. Debts reaching unimaginable heights. Inflation creeping back after decades of calm. The same excuses, the same confidence, the same belief that this time is different. History doesn't repeat word for word, but it punishes those who ignore its lessons. Every empire we explored tonight made the same fatal mistake. They confused paper with wealth, promises with value, printing with prosperity, and every one of them paid the ultimate price. The real question is not if another monetary collapse will happen, but whether you'll be ready when it does. If this opened your eyes to the patterns shaping our world, hit subscribe. History has already given us the answers, we just have to listen. When nations enter their darkest moments, they all reach for the same dangerous solution. It doesn't matter whether the collapsing power is an ancient kingdom or a modern superstate, ruled by emperors, monarchs, or presidents. When debts rise faster than income, when war drains every last coin, when panic spreads through society, governments always fall back on the same fatal idea. They print money. It feels like a miracle at first, a quick fix that promises relief. But history proves that newly created money always becomes the spark that burns the entire system down. What you're about to hear isn't forgotten history buried in dusty books. It's a pattern that repeats over and over again. Every failing civilization believes it can bend economic reality by creating wealth out of nothing. The same signs we see today appeared before Rome collapsed, before Germany crumbled, and before Zimbabwe destroyed itself. The script is almost identical each time. Crisis hits, chaos rises, people grow angry, money runs out, taxes can't go higher without rebellion, borrowing becomes impossible, and expenses keep growing. Then leaders discover the easy option: just print more currency, create it with ink instead of effort, pretend it has value simply because the government says so. But this illusion never survives for long. Once the presses start, prices explode, savings fade away, entire classes of society disappear. Families wake up to find decades of work erased overnight. The money meant to rescue the nation becomes the very force that destroys it. And what is even more disturbing is that every leader who takes this path truly believes they are different. They insist their crisis is unique, their advisors are smarter, their nation is stronger. They assure their people that the disasters of other countries could never happen to them. Yet history always proves them wrong. To understand how predictable this cycle is, we look at three very different civilizations separated by centuries, but united by the same act of self-destruction: Rome, Weimar Germany, and modern Zimbabwe. Rome didn't fall simply because of invaders or corrupt politics. Those were symptoms of something deeper. The real death blow was hidden inside the coins Romans used every day. For centuries, the silver denarius was the foundation of trade across the empire. It was trusted everywhere. From Britain to the Middle East, soldiers were paid with it, merchants saved it, citizens stored it for the future. Its value came from its silver content, its weight, its purity. But running a huge empire cost far more than Rome could afford. Border armies, endless wars, massive buildings. These drained the treasury faster than taxes could refill it. Raising taxes risked unrest. Borrowing wasn't a real option, so emperors turned to quiet debasement. They reduced the silver in each coin but kept it looking the same. At first, the change was subtle. Under Augustus, the denarius was almost pure silver, but each new ruler shaved off a little more. By Caracalla's reign, only half the silver remained. By Gallienus' time, less than 5% was left. The silver coin had become bronze, hidden under a thin silver coat that rubbed off with a scratch. People quickly realized what was happening. The coins felt lighter and cheaper. Merchants began weighing each piece, rejecting the fakes, raising prices to protect themselves. Inflation crept in and then surged. Wheat that once cost 1 coin soon cost 5, then 10, not because wheat changed, but because the money had rotted from the inside. As trust collapsed, Rome minted even more coins to compensate for the lost value. The more they printed, the less each coin was worth. A vicious cycle began, a flood of bad money destroying the economy from within. Local markets reverted to barter. Soldiers demanded goods instead of pay. Tax collectors brought in coins that were worthless by the time they arrived. The empire didn't collapse from foreign invasion, it unraveled economically first. The foundation was gone long before the walls fell. Centuries later, Germany repeated the same mistake after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to pay impossible reparations, more than the entire nation produced in a year. Refusing to pay meant invasion. Raising taxes meant rebellion. Borrowing wasn't an option, so Germany turned to printing money. At first, it seemed manageable, a few billion marks here and there, but each new note weakened the currency, and soon the government needed even more money to make the same payments. By 1922, printing presses ran constantly. Workers demanded wages twice a day as their money lost value by the hour. Then came the explosion of 1923. Prices didn't rise, they went nuclear. Bread that once cost a single mark now cost millions, then billions. People carried banknotes in wheelbarrows just to buy groceries. Children built toys out of worthless bills. Families who had saved for decades lost everything in a few months. The middle class, the heart of the country, was wiped out. Meanwhile, the rich and the clever escaped with gold or foreign currency. Hyperinflation didn't just destroy money, it shattered the trust and stability of German society, fueling anger that extremists would later exploit.